Hey everybody, it's Mr. Schaber and welcome to our pro football presentation on defensive players. One of the earliest great defensive players in pro football was Chuck Bednarik, who played his entire career for the Philadelphia Eagles. He was known as a devastating tackler. He was a brute on defense. Of course, he played on both sides of the ball, which pretty much all players did in his era and before his era. He was really the last great, though, two-way player in the NFL. Played linebacker and center, if you can imagine the physical toll that would take on you. He was so good that out of college that he was drafted with the number one overall pick in the 1949 draft. And he, in his pro career, was a 10-time All-Pro selection and led the Eagles to 2 championships during his career. He was named to the NFL's 50th and 75th anniversary all-time teams, as well as the 1950s All-Decade team. His number 60 jersey was retired by the Eagles, and he was inducted to the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 1967. He also served in the Army Air Forces during World War II, and he was so tough and so rugged and durable that he only missed 3 games in his 14 seasons. Just remarkable. But there he is on the bottom left there. Uh, he had basically knocked out a star player for the New York Giants named Frank Gifford, and it hospitalized Gifford. He missed a full season because of it, and people thought Gifford was dead after the hit. That's how devastating it was. But he was a beast and absolutely one of the best football players of his era. Night Train Lane, undrafted out of college, had gone to little Scottsbluff Junior College in Nebraska, dropped out after 1 year, served in the U.S. Army for 4 years, including in the Korean War, and then started his pro football career, undrafted, like I said, and he played for 3 teams during his 14-year pro stint, and most famously for the Detroit Lions. He is one of the great cornerbacks, defensive backs of all time. He got his nickname because he would take night trains to away games because he was afraid to fly, and so he preferred to take the train. He was a devastating hitter, and he was unbelievable in coverage. You can see his career: 68 interceptions and over 1,200 interception return yards, 5 touchdowns off interceptions, 7 Pro Bowls, 6-time first team All Pro, 4-time second team All Pro defensive back, so 10-time All Pro. And you can see he had 14 interceptions as a rookie, which is a single season rookie and NFL record. It didn't take long for teams to realize not to throw his way because it would not end well for them. You talk about tough. Gino Marchetti is one of the toughest players in NFL history. You know, they say playing on the gridiron is, it's brutal, it's physically demanding, which it is. But Gino Marchetti had served as a machine gunner in the U.S. Army during World War II. He fought in the Battle of the Bulge, which was the last great battle of World War II. So I think football was probably kind of a nice break, a walk in the park compared to what he'd been to or been through during the Second World War. He played for 15 seasons for the Dallas Texans and mostly for the Baltimore Colts. That's where he gained his fame as a pro football player. He was a defensive end, and you can see 11 Pro Bowls and 10 overall All-Pro selections, including 9 first-team selections. He was twice an NFL champion with the Baltimore Colts, back-to-back years in 58 and 59. They retired his number 89 jersey. He was named to the All-Madden All-Millennial team in 2000 and the NFL All-Time team in 2000 as well, inducted to the Hall of Fame in 1972. He is one of the all-around great defensive players ever to play. A face only a mother could love, Ray Nitschke. But he had kind of a tragic, he had some tragedy in his life. And he overcame that and became one of the great defensive players that we've seen. He played for 15 seasons for the Green Bay Packers. Had played at the University of Illinois as a linebacker, continued to be a linebacker in the pros. His dad, you can see here, I've written, his dad passed away when he was 4, and his mother passed away when he was 13. And his 2 older brothers raised him from that point on. He was a star at Illinois and later becomes, you can see, a 3-time first team All-Pro, 4-time second team All-Pro, and helped the Packers win 5 NFL championships. Unbelievable. Three NFL titles before the Super Bowl era and the first 2 Super Bowls. He was even the MVP of the 1962 NFL championship game. Devastating hitter, smart player, tough as they got, and of course when he smiled he was missing most of his teeth. So his number 66 jersey is retired by the Packers, and he was inducted to the Hall of Fame in 1978. Ray Nitschke. Deacon Jones is one of, if not the greatest, defensive end ever in football. Deacon Jones played for 14 years for the Rams, the Chargers, and the Redskins. He was he was the guy that coined the term QB sack. Like in the old days, you would sack or take a city in war. He sacked the quarterback, and he's the guy that made that term in vogue. He was nicknamed the Secretary of Defense because he was such a devastating player. What's crazy is you can look. He came out of Little Mississippi Valley State, which is the same school that Jerry Rice came from years later. He was drafted in 1961 in the 14th round. The NFL draft, which now has 7 rounds, used to have obviously many more than 7 rounds. He was the 186th pick in the draft, and I'm guessing if teams had to do it over again, he would be much higher. 8-time Pro Bowl selection. You can see also 8 All-Pro selections, including 5 first teams. 2-time and back-to-back Defensive Player of the Year in pro football. He unofficially holds the 2 highest single sack totals in history. This is, even though he coined the term sack, they didn't keep official sack totals when he was playing, at least for the majority of his career. So they believe he had 26 sacks in 1967 and 24 in 1968, the years he was back-to-back Defensive Player of the Year. And those were in 14-game seasons. So you can see he just dominated on defense. He dominated, a game because he was always in the backfield, disrupting plays, dropping quarterbacks for sacks, dropping running backs for losses. He was just unbelievable. So they believe that his career stats would have been 194 and a half sacks overall. Of course, his jersey's retired by the Rams, and he was Sports Illustrated's defensive end of the century when Sports Illustrated named their all-time team for the century. So anyway, that was Deacon Jones. Dick Butkus. Like Ray Nitschke, played at University of Illinois. Dick Butkus was a star at the University of Illinois. He was one of the toughest, meanest guys that football has ever seen. You can see, I love that picture on the bottom left there. He's taking on about 4 Green Bay Packers by himself. It looks like he's tackling them all. And he is considered absolutely one of the toughest, biggest hitters, greatest of all time. One of the most feared and intimidating players, and certainly linebackers, to ever play. He was drafted with the 3rd overall pick in the 1965 draft. You can see he was 8-time Pro Bowl selection and an 8-time All-Pro selection, 6 times being first team. 2-time Defensive Player of the Year, back-to-back years in 69 and 70. And you can see his career stats: over 1,000 tackles, 22 interceptions as a linebacker. That's incredible. And 27 fumble recoveries. He was a 1960s All-Decade Team and 1970s All-Decade Team award winner. His number 51 jersey has been immortalized by being retired by the Bears, and he was inducted to the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 1979. Every year, the Butkus Award is given to the best college linebacker, and so that's still, I mean, obviously quite an honor in college. And then, every NFL linebacker aspires to be like Dick Butkus, known for the famous crew cut and just, if you saw that, I mean, that picture on the upper right, if you saw that coming at you, just run, man. And so Dick Butkus is one of the greats. Mean Joe Green played for 13 seasons for the Pittsburgh Steelers. He'd played at Little North Texas University, and he was a defensive lineman. What a devastating player. The fourth overall pick in the 1969 draft. He was rated as the number 13 best all-time player by NFL.com. Defensive lineman. 10 Pro Bowls, 5 first-team All-Pro selections, 3 second-team All-Pro selections. He was 11-time first-team All-AFC, and he helped the Steelers develop and dominate with what was known as their steel curtain defense. He anchored that. 4 Super Bowls to his name, 4 Super Bowl rings. There he is showing them off in the upper left. That'd be a nice thing to have. And he was just dominating, would dominate the defensive line. He was NFL All-Decades team for 1970s. He was named to the NFL 75th Anniversary All-Time team. He was the Rookie of the Year in 1969 and 2-time Defensive Player of the Year in 1972 and 74. He was unbelievable. The Pittsburgh Steelers didn't officially retire his jersey because they don't really do that, but they just say they no longer issue the jersey. So it's basically like being a retired jersey. And he was inducted to the Hall of Fame in 1987. Definitely, you'd want him on your team. If you were starting a team from scratch, you'd want him to anchor your defensive line. The Manster, half man, half monster, Randy White, played his entire 14-year career for the Dallas Cowboys. Was a star at the University of Maryland. He played defensive end, linebacker, and defensive tackle. He played on the line and he played linebacker as well off the line. The number 2 overall pick in 1975. 9 Pro Bowls, 9 first-team All-Pros, and those were all in consecutive years from 1977 to 1985. Unbelievable, great player. Won 3 NFC titles, therefore went to 3 Super Bowls, and was a champion in Super Bowl 12 in the 1977 season. In fact, he was co-MVP of that Super Bowl. Defensive Player of the Year in the NFC in 1978. You can see his career stats: over 1,104 tackles, including 701 solo tackles, 52 sacks, missed only 1 game in 14 years, incredibly durable, reliable, and dominant. And so his career was capped off in 1994 by an induction into the Hall of Fame. Lawrence Taylor is considered by quite a few people to be maybe the best defensive player in NFL history. He was unblockable, unguardable, completely took over games by himself. He could do everything. He could run like the wind. He sacked quarterbacks like crazy. He was kind of not the inventor of, but maybe the perfecter of the strip sack, where you'd go to sack the quarterback, and not only would you sack the quarterback, but you'd strip the ball out and cause a fumble. And Taylor was capable of not only doing that, but picking up the ball and taking it for a touchdown. He was so dominant. He played his entire career for the Giants, the New York Giants, all 13 seasons. And he'd been a star at the University of North Carolina and was the number 2 overall pick in the 1981 draft because of it. 10 years in a row as a Pro Bowler, 10 years in a row, those same 10 years as an All-Pro. He led the Giants to 2 Super Bowls in the 1986 and 1990 seasons. He was the NFL MVP in 1986 as a linebacker and defensive end. Mainly, he you could never, like I said, you could never block him because you predicate your offensive blocking scheme around trying to stop him from getting into your backfield, which obviously opened things up for other defensive players on his team to have success. But even then, you knew who to block, and you still couldn't block him. So you can see in 1986 when he was the MVP of the league, he had 20 and a half sacks that year. Um, he was three-time Defensive Player of the Year for the NFL, and also Rookie of the Year is his first season in 1981. So he came out of the gates flying. His career stats: almost 1,100 tackles, 132 and a half sacks, 9 interceptions. He recorded double-digit sacks every year from 1984 to 1990. I mean, that's just devastating. So, of course, he was on the 1980s All-Decade Team and the 75th Anniversary All-Time Team for the NFL. The Giants have retired his number 56 jersey, and he was inducted to the Hall of Fame in 1999. Mike Singletary, one of the greats. Mike Singletary was a second-round pick out of Baylor. He was a really good player at Baylor, obviously to be a second-round pick and number 38 overall. But he played 12 seasons, all for the Bears, at linebacker. But he developed into one of the smartest, most intense defensive players in the league. He was coached by the legendary Buddy Ryan for most of his career with the Bears, and with Mike Singletary and other stars that the Bears had on defense. In the mid '80s, the Bears developed one of the greatest defenses in NFL history. Uh, 10 Pro Bowls, 10 consecutive Pro Bowl selections. He was 8 times a first team All Pro and 1 time a second team All Pro. Like I said, helped the Bears win that Super Bowl 20 in the 1985 season. That team was one of the most dominant teams ever. Their defense was one of the best ever. Their offense was fantastic, led by Walter Payton, Jim McMahon, uh, and some speedy receivers on the outside. They were unstoppable. They went 15-1 that year, blew out everybody in the playoffs and beat the Patriots in the Super Bowl. They were just incredible to watch. He was a 1980s All-Decade Team recipient, as well as 2 time Defensive Player of the Year, 1985 and '88. Uh, Almost 1,500 career tackles, 7 interceptions, 19 sacks. He was just fantastic. He also got into coaching after his playing career was done and coached the 49ers for a couple of seasons, and was just amazing. So as a player, Mike Singletary was great. You talk about great defensive backs, and we talked about Night Train Lane, but Ronnie Lott has to be up there in the top just handful of greatest defensive backs ever. He played for 14 years, mainly for the 49ers, played for the Raiders for a little bit, as well as the Jets right at the end. He was a college star at USC. He played cornerback and safety, mainly safety for most of his pro career. He was one of the most ferocious hitters and the most intimidating hitters that the NFL has ever seen. If receivers caught the ball over the middle, they knew they were going to get destroyed by Ronnie Lott. He went to 10 Pro Bowls. He was an 8 time first team All Pro. He just dominated the position for the better part of a decade. He was on 4 Super Bowl winning teams, all with the 49ers during the '80s. And you can see his career stats: 63 interceptions, 730 interception return yards, 5 touchdowns, had 100 plus tackles in 5 seasons during his career, twice led the NFL in interceptions, was part of the '80s and '90s All Decade teams. His number 42 jersey is retired, of course, and he's a guy that you would want on your team, believe me. If you looked up the definition of dominance or domination in the dictionary, it would probably have a picture of Reggie White. A star at the University of Tennessee, he decided to go to the USFL out of college, played for a couple seasons there, and then went to the NFL. In the NFL, he played from 1985 to 1998, and then as well in the year 2000. So 15 seasons overall for mostly the Philadelphia Eagles and Green Bay Packers, and then he went to the Carolina Panthers right at the end of his career. He was a defensive end and defensive tackle that could not be blocked, could not be stopped. He dominated games. He was part of the Philadelphia Eagles defense in the late 80s that was absolutely dominant. Buddy Ryan, the legendary Bears defensive coordinator from the early to mid 80s, got a head coaching job with Philadelphia and decided to take it. And in the late 80s and into the early 90s, their defenses were outstanding, and Reggie White was the anchor of those defenses. And then his contract came up, and he was a free agent, and everybody thought he would re-sign with Philadelphia, and he actually shocked the football world by, in the early to mid 90s, signing with the Packers, and he helped them win a Super Bowl. And so but he was just incredible. He was nicknamed the Minister of Defense because he was actually an ordained evangelical minister. So he would actually at times um, he'd preach a sermon in a church on a Sunday morning and then go play a game and sack the quarterback and dominate the game. You can see he won some USFL awards, including Man of the Year in 1985 and named to the USFL All-Time Team, even though, of course, it was just a short-lived league. 13 Pro Bowl selections, 13 in a row, which is second most all time, and 10-time first team All Pro, 3 times second team All Pro, so 13 as well, All Pro selections. He was awesome for so long in his career. He aged well, and he was just so big and so strong, and would just overpower offensive linemen. But he was a nice guy, so he'd go sack a quarterback or knock an offensive lineman on their can, and then help them up. That was Reggie White. Like I said, he had helped the Packers win a Super Bowl. That was the 1996 season, Super Bowl 31. He was two-time NFL Defensive Player of the Year, over a decade apart, as well as twice led the league in sacks in back-to-back seasons. And he was named to 2 All-Decades teams, the 1980s and 1990s. His jersey has been retired by both the Eagles and the Packers. He's a member of both the Eagles and Packers Hall of Fame, and he was inducted to the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 2006. His stats: over 1,100 career tackles. He is second all time in career sacks of the quarterback with 198. He even had 3 interceptions and 19 fumble recoveries and 3 touchdowns. He still has an NFL record of 9 straight years with at least 10 sacks. He was incredible. And there is Reggie. He just, for the Eagles and the Packers, just wow. You watched him play, and again, he was like a Lawrence Taylor, where you knew who you should block, you knew who you might have to double team or triple team, or whatever however many guys you need to put on him, and it didn't matter. He was still going to get to where he wanted to go, and he was still going to dominate a game, and that was Reggie White. Bruce Smith played for 19 seasons as a defensive end in the NFL. That is just crazy. 19 years. Talk about durable. Talk about just, able to, toughness and just longevity. He was a star at Virginia Tech, and because of that, he was the first overall pick in the 1985 draft. During his career, he was selected to the Pro Bowl 11 times, and 11 times as well to All-Pro teams, 9 first teams and 2 second teams. He played most of his career, almost the vast majority, for the Buffalo Bills, and he was a star for them. Obviously, he was a star. He was on the list, but he was more than a star. He led Buffalo to 4 straight Super Bowls. Now, that's the only team that's ever done that, to 4 straight Super Bowls. But the thing was, they lost all 4. And so he never gets the credit, I don't think, anyway, that he is due for how great and dominant he was. 2-time Defensive Player of the Year for the whole NFL. And you can see 1980s and 1990s All-Decade teams. Pro Football Hall of Fame in 2009. His career stats: over 1,200 tackles, 200 sacks, which if you look down below, that is the NFL all-time record. He's just a couple ahead of Reggie White. He has an NFL record 13 seasons with at least 10 sacks. So just incredible staying power. That was Bruce Smith. And he's one of the nice guys as well. Just a really good dude who was a pleasure to be around, and he was just one of the NFL good guys. Rod Woodson, dominant defensive back. He played for 17 seasons, and as a 17 seasons as a defensive back is almost unheard of. To keep yourself in that good a shape and to be that good for that long is crazy. Mainly for the Pittsburgh Steelers, played for the 49ers as well, and had productive seasons with the Ravens as well. The Raiders kind of at the end, but was still good. I mean, you don't play for 17 years in any pro sport at any position unless you're really good. And so he had played collegiately at Purdue. He also did track and field there, and he was the 10th overall pick in the 1987 draft. Played corner and safety. Played both quite a bit. Of course, toward the end of his career, moved over to safety. But 11 Pro Bowls, 8 All-Pro teams in the NFL, 6 first teams, 2 second teamers. He was the Defensive Player of the Year in 1993. He went to 3 Super Bowls and won uh, the Super Bowl in the 2000 season. That was Super Bowl 35 with the Ravens. You can see over 1,100 career tackles, 13 and a half sacks, 71 interceptions, which is third all time, 1,483 return yards off interceptions, 32 fumble recoveries, 17 touchdowns. He has an NFL record 12 career interceptions returned for a touchdown. Named to Pittsburgh's all-time team, the 1990s All-Decade Team, and the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 2009. Rod Woodson was about as good as it got as a defensive back. One of the flashiest and best defensive backs in history was Deion Sanders. Neon Deion was his nickname. Played from 1989 to 2005, so 17 years. For the Falcons is where he started out, and then went to the 49ers and Cowboys, the Redskins, and the Ravens. Was probably the prime of his career was with the 49ers and with the Cowboys. He was a multi-sport star at Florida State University, and as you will see, he also, when he went to the pros, didn't just play in the NFL, he also played in the major leagues. He was the 5th overall pick in the 1989 draft because of how great he'd been in college. He not only did he play cornerback, but he returned kicks, punts, and kickoffs as well for much of his career. He was an 8-time Pro Bowler and a 9-time first team All-Pro, 9 seasons in a row. He won 2 Super Bowls in back-to-back years with different teams. He won Super Bowl 29 in the 1994 season with the 49ers and Super Bowl 30 the 1995 season with the Cowboys. Twice he was the AP NFL defensive, or excuse me, once the AP NFL Defensive Player of the Year. That was 1994 with the 49ers, and then twice the NFC Defensive Player of the Year with the 49ers. You can see his career stats: 53 interceptions, over 1,300 interception return yards, 9 interception return for touchdowns, 6 punt returns for touchdowns, 3 kickoff returns for a touchdown, a fumble recovery touchdown, and 3 receiving touchdowns. So, I mean, you talk about just all around versatile. That was Deion Sanders. He was named to the 1990s All-Decade Team as a cornerback and punt returner. Just incredible. NFL record 19 career defensive and special teams return touchdowns, and like I said, he even played in Major League Baseball for a time. He was an outfielder for the Yankees, the Braves, the Reds, and the Giants. He was in the 1992 World Series, and with the Braves, they lost that World Series to the Blue Jays, but he was in the World Series with the Braves. So he would play oftentimes when there was a short overlap, of course, between baseball season right at the end in the fall and then the beginning of football season. So he would play a football game on a Sunday and then go play baseball during the week and then go back and play football on Sunday again. I mean, it was incredible. I mean, who can do this? In 1989, he hit a major league home run and scored an NFL touchdown in the same week. Still the only player to ever do that, and is the only man to play in both a Super Bowl and a World Series. course, after he was done, he got into broadcasting, and but while he was playing, he was electric. That's why they called him Neon Dion. He could do anything on a football field. He was incredible. And here are some pictures of Deion Sanders with the Falcons, the 49ers, the Cowboys, and the Atlanta Braves, his baseball uniform. So, but there he is, of course, high stepping. He was known as, he was flamboyant. He was, he loved the attention, no doubt about it. Never shied away from the camera, but he could back it up, and he was incredible. Ray Lewis played for the Baltimore Ravens for his entire career. You can see his career was long, 1996 to 2012. He was a standout at the University of Miami and one of the great linebackers to ever play. First round pick in 1996, went on to be a 13-time Pro Bowler, as well as a 10-time selection to all pro teams, 7 first teams, and 3 second teams. He was part of 2 Super Bowl championship teams with the Ravens, uh, the 2000 season and the 2012 season. And both Super Bowls were fantastic. In fact, he was the MVP of the first Super Bowl that he was in the 2000 season. That was Super Bowl 35. Twice the NFL Defensive Player of the Year in 2000 and 2003, and over 2,000 career tackles, 41 and a half sacks, and 31 interceptions. He holds all kinds of records for linebackers. And you can see a couple of them. NFL record 13 Pro Bowls for an inside or middle linebacker, NFL record 10-time All-Pro for inside or middle linebacker, and NFL record 51 tackles in a single postseason. Um, it just incredible. I mean, he was all over the field. No matter where uh, he lined up, he would end up at the ball, and you just couldn't block him. He was crazy, and so he was just he's a guy that you could build a team around. That's for sure. Inducted to the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 2018 as the capstone to his career, and for his play on the field, it was well deserved. Ed Reed, Ray Lewis's teammate for much of his career, was one of the greatest defensive backs in history. He played for 12 seasons, mostly for the Ravens, but also for the Houston Texans and the New York Jets right at the end. He had also gone to the University of Miami, um, like Ray Lewis, and he was drafted with the 24th overall pick in the 2002 draft. 9 Pro Bowls in his 12 seasons. He was the 2004 Defensive Player of the Year for the whole NFL, and won a Super Bowl with the Ravens on that 2013 team. You can see 64 career interceptions and 13 total touchdowns, over 500 tackles, and 6 sacks. He also holds some records. Most career interception return yards. Of his 64 interceptions, he had a flair for the dramatic. He'd return, well, you can see he has the longest as well interception return in NFL history, 108 yards. So 1,590 overall return yards off interceptions, 108 on one of them. Most career postseason interceptions, he has 9, and that's tied with 3 other players. And he's the first player in NFL history to return an interception, a punt, a blocked punt, and a fumble for a touchdown. So he could do it all on the field, and he was everywhere. And speaking of being everywhere on a field, the ultimate ball hawk, they called this type of player, Troy Polamalu, star at USC, played his whole 12-year career for the Pittsburgh Steelers. He was the 16th overall pick in the 2003 draft, one of the great safeties of all time. He's up there with Ronnie Lott and Night Train Lane and these other guys who, when we say defensive back, we're talking about a cornerback or a safety. That's either one could be a defensive back. A lot of these guys start out as corners in their early part of their career, and then they go to safety, toward the middle or end of their career. But Polamalu was a safety pretty much the entire time that he played, and went to 3 Super Bowls with the Steelers, won 2 of them in the 2005 and 2008 seasons. He was the Defensive Player of the Year for the entire NFL in 2010. A member of the 2000s All-Decade team, named to the Pittsburgh Steelers All-Time team. Went to 8 Pro Bowls, and you can see his stats: 32 interceptions, 5 total touchdowns, 581 tackles, and 12 sacks. He was everywhere. He would come up pre-snap. He'd come up to the line and he'd back off, or he'd stay and blitz, or he'd uh, backpedal and make a tackle somewhere down the field or intercept a ball. He was everywhere, and he messed with offenses so bad. He got inside quarterbacks' heads because he was just everywhere before the snap, and you never knew exactly where he would end up. You never knew how to exactly read what he was going to do for a given play, and so he was incredible. You watch him play, and you were in awe. Anyway, so that is Troy Polamalu.